A referendum proposing the authorities in Berlin seize and take into public ownership more than 200,000 homes has passed. The Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen, that means expropriate Deutsche Wohnen and Company referendum campaign has now cleared all its electoral hurdles. The vote passed with a resounding yes vote of 56.4% in Sunday, 26 September, in the capital. Berliners has spoken, and they have to say so clear that they want city authorities to pass a law which would allow for expropriation of what they will call private real estate companies, especially those that own more than 3,000 housing units. The campaigners say that the company would compensate at a rate well below market value. So how did they get there, and where do they go now? And another question that we are going to ask is, what can the Swedish housing movement learn from this German equivalent? Here we have Philip Lenero from Allt, alla, and Katja from Marknadshyror, who will talk to our dear guest from Germany, Jonas Becker, from the group who would lead the referendum, Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen. And welcome to the scene, Leonard, Jonas, and Katja.
So, hello, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Now it's fine. So I'm Katja from Rädda Hyresrätten I Haninge, which is like outside Stockholm, so part of that group. And I'm very happy that we can have this discussion here today. And I can start, I think, with the first question to Jonas from Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen. Can you tell us a bit more about how the movement for like socialization or expropriation, how it started in Berlin?
Ja, tack för inbjudan först. Jag skulle vilja bara säga att jag är verkligen glad att jag kan vara här. Och först att säga, jag snackar lite svenska men inte så bra att jag tror att jag kan verkligen ha hela samtalet på svenska, och därför är jag tacksam att vi kan ha det på engelska, och jag hoppas att det är okej för alla. Yes, so thank you for the question. I think it really started 4, 5, 6 years ago when Berliners first realized that their rents are so rapidly increasing that they are threatened by eviction and by gentrification, and small groups of renters formed organizational forms where they said, that's enough, we need to fight this, we need to do something. And that movement just became larger and larger and larger. And then at some point, the idea came up that we wanted to use an article in the German constitution that has never been triggered, which is that certain parts of the economy, as well as real estate, can be socialized if necessary and if it helps the public. And then really this idea grew and grew. And I think the most important part why it has become so popular in Berlin, why we have so many activists fighting for this, is really the development that in the last 10 years, the rents in Berlin have doubled. And that's a development that is much more fierce than in many other cities, even though we see the development all around the world. And of course, also in Sweden, for example. And yes, and then this movement became really, really large, and many people wanted to get active.
All right, so I have a question for Jonas. So the name Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen, which translates to pretty much expropriate Deutsche Wohnen and the rest. Can you tell us a little bit how it came to existence, about Deutsche Wohnen precisely, why your name is Deutsche Wohnen?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I didn't realize that if I mute myself again, then I couldn't unmute myself again. Yeah, Deutsche Wohnen is one of the largest companies or real estate corporations in Germany. And yeah, the problem is that we've had a very large public sector in housing in Germany up until the fall of the Berlin Wall and around the beginning of the 90s. And that was really the era when privatization started, and those large corporations just bought the houses that were previously owned by government-led corporations or by communal actors or by cooperatives. And I think this is like one of the main conclusions we can draw from the era of neoliberalism in the 90s and in the 2000s, that this way of privatization with such essential goods as housing was 100% the wrong way, and led to the development that we have right now, that people cannot afford their rent anymore, that they can't find another affordable housing. And so those real estate corporations are, from our perspective, really the root of the disastrous development that we are experiencing right now. And that's why we said we need to really get to the bottom of the problem, which is that housing should not be subject to profit maximization and to increase shareholder value. So that's where we wanted to tackle the problem, and that's why we are addressing the real estate corporations.
Okay, you want to take a question, Katja?
Yeah, because I wonder a bit more how you organize yourself, because I read somewhere that there were like more than 1,000 or just about 1,000 activists all in this campaign, Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen. So I wonder a bit more how it is organized, how you like engage all those people.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why why our campaign has been so successful is that we really wanted to make it possible that everybody can get active. So we wanted to make an offer where you can just like say, for example, in the phase where we had to collect signatures in order to get our referendum started, we just said, it's all right, just come to us. We are collecting signatures here and there and everywhere, and just come by, see how we do it. You don't have to do anything. You can just watch, you can ask questions. There is absolutely nothing you have to do. You can just come on by and see how we do stuff. And so we wanted to make an offer where people who don't have much time, who maybe are not even politically organized, can get in touch with us very easily on their way to work, from work, or wherever, to university, and just see what we're doing and just get active if they want to. And I think this sort of structure helped us to also reach people who maybe have always thought that they don't want to be politically active and they don't want to really do something. And I think the second most important part is that we really had a decentralized structure, so that we, of course, have this core of the campaign, which makes a lot of organizational stuff. But the real work that we did, for example, during our election campaign, was handled by local structures that had free hand and could do whatever they want. That was really completely decentralized. And that is the thing that I think most people thought. There is no hierarchy really in our structure, but we can really do what is necessary where we live right now, because we know how people think here, what people like, what they dislike. Some things from, for example, our election campaign won't work in this area, but they are perfect for another area. And that is something only people can decide who live right there. And I think that is a very important part.
Just one quick follow-up question on that. Do you had any support from, like you said, it was decentralized and so on, like, but did you still have support from other, like, political organization or trade unions and so on? And how came this about, if so?
Yeah, yes, we had a very, very strong support from the left party in Germany, which endorsed us quite at the beginning and helped us a lot. But we always, and we had a lot of unions, for example, that supported us as well, and the youth organizations of, for example, the Social Democratic Party and the Greens, but not the party themselves, only the youth organizations. But we wanted really to focus on that everybody can get involved, but as soon as they are involved, they are in the campaign and they are not promoting their own union, their own party, their own structure, whatever. But we are happy for every helping hand, but it is our structure, and you can really like get involved in order to work for the referendum and for collecting signatures, or yeah, just do placards or something like that.
All right, so I mean, you're a big inspiration for housing movements all over Europe, at least. So, I mean, you've taken initiative to first make signatures to make the referendum possible. Can you tell us a little bit about this process, how it worked?
Yeah, the process for direct democracy in Germany has a lot of obstacles, mainly due to historic reason, because after World War II, institutions were keen on making the German democratic system a very representative one and not so much dominated by direct democracy. And that's why we have this three-phase system where we at first need to collect, I think in Berlin, it's around 20,000 signatures. That was 2 or 3 years ago. And if you collect those signatures, then the government in Berlin, the Senate, has to accept your idea of the referendum that you want to have. And in the second step, then you have to find or to collect over 170,000 signatures. So that's the second phase of collecting signatures. And if that is successful, then there will be an immediate referendum, and the Senate cannot check your idea anymore. So the second phase really is the crucial part for most referendums, because it's very difficult to collect over 170 or 180,000 signatures in Berlin. Keep in mind, in Berlin, almost a quarter, like 24% of Berliners are not eligible to vote, because we have many people from other European countries or from abroad, international people, expats, and they are not eligible to vote. Their signatures don't count. So it's very difficult to collect all these signatures. And especially during a pandemic, you can imagine when all the cultural events were closed and clubs were closed, festivals were canceled. So we were quite surprised that we really managed to collect that many signatures. I mean, we were all optimistic, obviously, but we collected over 350,000 signatures, which is the most any referendum has ever collected in the history of Berlin. So that made us very optimistic for the election campaign and for the referendum.
How do you suggest the socialization of how it should be done? What is your proposal, so to say, to the politicians?
Yeah, our proposal really is that we don't want to simply take away the real estate and give it back to some sort of government-led corporation or state-owned housing like it was before, but we think it's time for a completely different approach. So we want to, of course, expropriate the corporations, but then we want to socialize, which means that we don't just want to give it back to the state, but we want to form a new institution under public law, which enables civil society actors, renters, as well as politicians to be part of the decisions that are made in this institution. So we want to democratize housing. We want to say that renters really have a say in what happens with their buildings, what happens in their local area. So that is a very important part for us, because we see that many companies that are government-led or that are state-owned don't necessarily behave so much better. I mean, of course, that is a way we think is better than private corporations, but still there are a lot of problems, and that's what we really want to tackle, and that's why we are fighting for a completely new approach for public housing.
Okay, so a really good question, Katja. I have a follow-up for that. I've heard numbers of the expropriation costing between 9 to 10 billion euros and then 7 to 36 billion euros. So your goal is obviously to buy back the property under market value. But if the compensation is too high, is there any danger of it diminishing the initiative?
And also the important part is that we don't want to simply buy back. That's why you said exactly, we want to pay a compensation under market value, because if we just wanted to buy it back, then we could just negotiate with the corporations, make an offer. Then we don't need this institutional way that we are taking right now. But we want to expropriate because we see that there is such a dynamic, such a really social. It's a social question, the question of housing, of affordable housing. So that's why we want to expropriate and socialize. And we argue that the sum of compensation must be at a height which enables us to lower rents and make them affordable in a long-term point of view. So that's our argument, and most juridical experts that we consulted agree with us. But you're right, if the compensation sum will be higher, that is some sort of a problem. But we would say that just largens the horizon of time in which we have to pay that. So we want to pay the compensation sum out of the rents that are incoming, and the rents don't have to be increased if the compensation sum is higher. It's just the time span that enlarges.
All right, I'll take another question. So now that you in theory won, I mean, you won the referendum, but you haven't yet won in actuality. How do you manage to not lose momentum?
Yeah, that is the most important question right now for us. That's true. And yeah, we have to follow the process of coalition building in Berlin right now very closely, and that's what we do. We organize protests in front of the buildings where the parties are negotiating right now, and we see that this momentum is on our side right now. But of course, we know that it's going to be a very long process. It's going to take a lot of time. But we are convinced that we are strong enough because we have so many people who are active, and we have such a huge support. And it is not like that the support in Berlin is disputed. Everybody acknowledges that there's a strong 59%, so almost 60% majority in Berlin who thinks that real estate corporations should be socialized. And that is nothing you can change overnight. That's nothing you can change over a year or with other measures. That's an undisputed fact for politicians in Berlin. So that's why we see very good arguments for Berliner politicians that they cannot ignore what happened, and that they need us to be part of the process, and they need us in order to say what Berliner renters want and what they voted for.
I think you talked about like the government, the Berlin government, and I understand it's the same day actually when the referendum took place. Also, the election for the new Berlin government took place. Not everyone maybe know in this here knows that Berlin has their own like government, Delstatsparlamentet. So I wonder, what do you think? What is because I understand it's a social democrat one, but with a little fine margin. What do you think is the next steps from the government side of you, from the politics side of you? What are they going to do now to tackle that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for the information. Yeah, exactly. And that's true. We are now very curious, of course, like most Berliners as well, what kind of coalition will be at the end of the negotiations. Because if the left party in Berlin won't be included in the government, it's just natural that it will be much more work for us and much harder to fight for our idea and for the referendum. But we are still convinced that in any way, no matter how the new coalition will be or how they will be formed, that in some way or another, they have to work on our idea and we have to be included. That's why we have so much pressure. And it's clear for us that it's not done with the referendum, but now we have a lot of work to do. We have to mobilize the renters in Berlin again. We have to really keep up the pressure from the street, and that's our only chance, and that's what we will do. And yeah, I think many politicians in Berlin underestimated the pressure that can be built from renters in Berlin. I mean, we have to consider that we have over 80% in Berlin who are renters. So that is an enormous potential if affordable housing is the first or second most important question for most Berliners who vote and who live in the city. So I think there's no way around this.
Great. So just a quick reminder that if anyone viewing has any question, you can write them in the Zoom chat, and we'll try to answer them the best way possible during the last 15 minutes. So yeah, this is a side question, but I read that the FDP, the Free Democratic Party, some member there compared a journalist who commented positively on the rent cap way back then. They like compared this journalist to a North Korean anchorwoman. So my question is, how are you viewed by everyday Berliners? Has it changed now that you won?
That's hard to say because before the referendum, of course, we were in touch almost every minute with every day with all the people on the street, and that is reduced right now, obviously, because the election campaign is over. We don't need to collect signatures anymore, but we are still, of course, in contact with the renters in Berlin, and we still, I mean, each and every one of us is a renter in Berlin. So, of course, we see that if 60% say yes to this referendum, they don't think that this is a North Korean measure, in your words or in the words of the journalist, the FDP politician. And of course, we've had some people who were attacking us and said that is like the GDR 2.0, that is communism, what do you want to do? But we always try to be very reasonable with people, and I think we've had the better arguments, which turned out in convincing of almost 60% of Berliners. And the most people, I mean, if you look at the result of the election, Katja said it, we've had the parliament election in Berlin at the same time. And if you combine the voter outcome for the Green Party and the Left Party, you haven't even reached half of the votes we got. So there must be so many people from conservatives, from liberals, from social democratic parties that also voted yes. So only because the parties or the establishment of the parties, the party chiefs are against us, that doesn't necessarily mean that party members from the basis, from the ground, they are against us as well. Quite the contrary, many of them supported us. They were active members in our structures. So I think that is really something that stunned most of the political elite in Berlin, that they, even in their own parties, had a lot of people who said, that's a reasonable idea, that's a good idea, we support this, even though the party establishment said, no, we cannot support this. And I think that this is also a key part of the pressure that we have to keep up and increase over the next time.
I have one question in the last minute, and we have a discussion with more. But one question about how is the situation in Germany in general? Does it has a like is it spreading your campaign? Because I think many of the companies, like what you also have in Sweden, like a Aktivister or Victoria Hemmers, is really like so large. There, of course, are many cities in Germany. How is do you have like a network or something? Can you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, the situation in many other cities in Germany is similar, but it's nowhere as extreme as it is in Berlin. That's why I think we are the first ones to introduce the idea of this referendum, and why it's really that big. But of course, many people from other cities come to us. We are happy to join other meetings, and we are happy to spread our idea. And many people are interested and said, we are thinking about doing the same in our city because we have the same problems. We see that there are new houses that are built, but nobody can afford them. Those are luxury apartments. They are not for low and medium income households. Where should people live? I mean, we are just normal people who work, who study, who live here. We need to live somewhere, and we should not have to pay 50 or 40% of our income for rent, or sometimes even more. But the situation, as I said, in Berlin is really extreme because the rents doubled in the last 10 years. And that is such a rapid development and such an extreme development. And that has changed the city so much that everybody sees this. Everybody in the city, no matter if you agree with us or not, but no one can deny that this change exists and that the city is so rapidly changing. And that is, I think, the most important difference to most other cities. But having said that, of course, the development can be observed all around the world. That's why many media outlets internationally also are interested in our story, because they see the same things happening in almost every metropolis around the globe.
Okay, great. So we're almost done 30 minutes now. So perhaps we should round off and do some questions from the chat. I have a question from Mahasti. She writes, could you please tell us more about how those big owners will be compensated and how will they be funded?
Yes, the compensation is really a crucial part, and that is probably also the part that is most disputed, because many conservative lawyers say that it's not possible to compensate under market value. They have to be compensated for what their real estate is worth right now. But we've had juridical expertise from the German parliament, from the Berlin parliament, and from many other lawyers and juridical experts who said the article which we want to trigger, Article 15 of the German Constitution, only makes sense if you compensate under market value, because otherwise it was just buying back, and buying back is not what expropriation and socialization means. So that really the inherent logic of this article is that you must be able to compensate under market value. But it's true that the real compensation sum, the height that we are calculating with, is just an approach we think makes a lot of sense. But the real compensation sum that is going to be the final one has to stand in the law that we need to work on in the upcoming time. And we want to pay the compensation out of the rents that we are taking, because if you just consider the situation right now, then those corporations get the rents and they pay a large amount to their shareholders. All that, for example, could be blown away because we don't need that anymore, because the housing is owned by the people who live in the housing. It's distributed to the public, so that we don't need this share that goes to shareholders anymore for the rent. So we could lower the rent, and with the rent we could pay the compensation, which is under market value, and therefore it would be quicker and it could be faster repaid, and then we could use the rent really to maintain the buildings, to buy new buildings, to build new buildings, and give them to social and affordable housing. That is our approach. Great. So do you have any questions? Katja, you can go.
No, I don't. I was just encourage people here in the Zoom room if they want to ask questions, because we don't have any.
If we don't have any, I have another question I can take. Yeah. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with Sweden, but we have this tenants union called Hyresgästföreningen. I've heard of Berliner Tenants Association. And then my question is, what is your relationship with these organizations? And do you cooperate, or how does it work?
Yeah, there is a large Berliner tenants initiative that supported us also for a very long time, and that is a very important connection for us, because it really shows that we are acting in the interests of tenants in Berlin and of renters, and that we are very closely connected, and we work together, and we did events together, we collected signatures together. They really supported us, and that is, yeah, as the trade unions and the left party, for example, that is really a crucial part that shows that many civil society actors in Berlin are on our side and are fighting together with us for affordable housing.
All right, so we're going to some more questions in the chat. Britta writes, is there any difference between the parts of Berlin that earlier was part of East Berlin and those who were part of West Berlin, and also houses built on the no man's land? I mean, did the buildings that were built after 1999 become more expensive?
Yeah, of course, I mean, there are some differences between East and West Berlin, but if we look at the outcome of the referendum, Berlin is structured in 12 different areas, and in 10 of those, we were able to gain a majority of votes. So that means West Berlin, East Berlin, North Berlin, South Berlin, everybody was in favor of our referendum, and there is not no such thing as a rip that goes through the city. And yeah, but for the corporations that own the buildings, I wouldn't say that there's much of a difference. They have many apartments in West Berlin that were previously owned by the public. They, of course, bought a lot of buildings in East Berlin when they were sold in the early 90s. And for me personally, in this campaign, I never differentiated between East and Western Berlin. I think that didn't play much of a role, actually.
Okay, great. So Mahasti writes, who found your campaign? Like who founded all of this campaigning?
How? It should be how, sorry.
Yeah,
oh, okay. Oh.
I figured, but yes, thank you. A very simple answer, crowdfunding. We got some donations from for example, the left party in Germany, but the main part of our funding was acquired by crowdfunding and just micro donations from people. We don't have anyone that works for us. We're all volunteers, and we spend a lot of our free time in order to make this referendum happen.
Okay, great.
I think now it's necessary.
You can go.
Okay, now I think we can have more. Before, when people think about more questions, I can have one more question. And this is: do you have some concrete plans you would like to share, or you can share with us? But what's like the next steps right now, if it's possible?
To be honest, I cannot share anything right now because we're in the middle of a discussion how our strategy is going to look like. Obviously, we had a lot to do up until the referendum, and we couldn't waste too much time before the referendum in order to what we are going to do afterwards, because we weren't 100% sure that we are going to win this referendum. That is also something many people in Berlin right now tend to forget. I mean, almost 60%, that sounds very convincing and seems like, yeah, that should be undisputed, but we were never that sure. We had polls in mid-August that saw us a tiny bit before those who wanted to say no in the referendum, but we could at no point be sure that we're going to win this referendum. So we really focused on the election campaign and put all our efforts into that. And we've of course had some ideas, but that is something that needs to be discussed internally before we can see something. And as I said before, it really depends on what kind of coalition builds the next government in Berlin. and how their coalition treaty is going to look like and how they want to treat our referendum. That is, of course, that will have a major impact on our strategy and how we will treat that in the future.
Another question in the chat. How do you keep up the spirit? Must be tough work.
Yeah, that's a good question. I sometimes ask that myself. But I can only say that probably it's because we are over 1,000 activists in Berlin. We are so many people doing so much great work that it really doesn't come or fall to single persons. It's not just one person who is responsible for that. So that means that even if you, for example, have some weeks where you can't really work for the campaign, others will keep it up. Others will jump in, and the same happens in the other direction. And I think that is really some sort of this spirit that is in this campaign, that we don't have a sort of membership and people who are saying, oh, you said you need to do this, you need to do that. No, it's just like, if you can do it and feel free. And also do your own projects. Just come to us. If you have a great idea, we don't have to run it through any structures. Just tell us about it, say what it is, and if it's cool, go for it, do it. And I think that is really how this works and how we managed to do that. Because if it was just a small circle of people, I think this would not have been possible, because it was just too much work and too much responsibility. But we've had so many people doing the work in local areas that I think that was the backbone, and still is the backbone of our campaign.
Great. So Mahasi put up another question. You talked about this a little bit, about the corona situation and how it became harder. But Mahasi asks, how and where did most contact and response come from? Is it from social media or face-to-face meetings, or how has it looked?
Yeah, that's, I think it was, yeah, good and bad at the same time, the pandemic situation, because in a large city as Berlin, it is very convenient if everyone can just join in a meeting that is held online, and you don't have to find a space where everybody can come to, and no one has to travel more than an hour, for example, just for a 2-hour meeting. But at the same time, of course, online meetings lack this sort of personal and direct contact that you have, and that is very important if you want to, and if you have to rely on each other, and if you really have to make personal connections. So I think it's always a bit of both. But yeah, it's true. I mean, I think there are many people in this campaign I have never met face to face, but almost on a weekly basis online. And that's just the situation we were in. We could not do it differently. But to answer this question, yes, most of the meetings, the organizational meetings and the strategy meetings were held online. But of course, you can't do an election campaign from online. We had to go on the streets. We had to knock on doors. And I think that is something I might not have stressed earlier enough. But I think that is one of the key cornerstones of our success, that we really used these organizing methods, that we just went to the people at their homes, knocked on their doors, tried to talk to them. And we did not want to fiercely convince someone like sometimes parties want to do in election campaigns. But we were just saying, we make an offer. If you want to get involved, if you want to change the situation, you don't have to do much. Just say yes in the referendum. And if you want to get involved, just text us, come to one of our meetings. They're happening everywhere in the city, and they are open for everyone. And there are no barriers, and everybody can get involved, and you don't commit to anything. You can just come by, see if it fits for you, and if it doesn't, no hard feelings, nothing happens. And I think that is what I really experienced is that I had always the feeling that this is an offer many people wanted to get for a long time, but didn't get. I would not say that most people in Berlin are unpoliticized, but they are just annoyed by how politics is organized right now, and they want to change that. And if someone comes around and makes an offer and says, yeah, hey, we can change something, we can do something, I know it's frustrating, but you don't have to do that much. If we all do a little bit, then we can really make a great deal work. So, and I think that is really one of the most important outcomes that I took from our campaign.
Great. Mahasi has another question. What other difficulties have you faced besides COVID restrictions?
Yeah, I would say that is also a point that many people in Berlin right now try to forget, but we had one party in the Berlin parliament, the left party, that supported us. Everybody else was against us in the beginning. The Green Party was comme ci, comme ça. Yeah, we want to support a little bit, but we want only to use it as a measure of pressure for the big corporations. And so if basically we had only one party that supported us, and the whole real estate corporation organizations were against us. They were advertising against us. Conservatives and liberals really had a hard campaign against us. They were using lies and propaganda against us. So, and we were a grassroots campaign with only voluntary people who wanted to make a change. We didn't have any professional activists or professional marketing experts, as some people claim. That's just not true. We were just people. We're just tenants. We are renters who want to change something and who want to fight the situation. And I think in retrospective, that really was, we had really strong actors against us. And I think it's a really great and inspiring success that you still can win almost 60% of the people, even though so much money is used against you and so much political power is used against you. But in the end, the people decide and not the money.
Yeah, I saw the comment. Even though you said you don't have PR experts and stuff, you had a great commercial I saw on Twitter. The movie you did was amazing, really nice.
Yes, because we had, I mean, we have over 1,000 activists, and everybody can do something. Everyone has an expertise in some sort of field, and that really is the problem. I mean, even people who can do great PR movies have to live somewhere. If they think my rent is too high and I can't find affordable housing, they have a very strong motive to work for you and to do these movies and to get involved. And that's something that most corporate organizations or conservative parties don't have. They only can pay people to do that, but they cannot buy inspiration. They cannot buy people who really want to change something and who really struggle. And that is, I think, the greatest inspiration that you can have for political activism.
We have just a couple of minutes left, but I wonder if you can just tell a bit more about the question of the Mietendeckel, the rent control, which you won at first and then you lost it. And is it still a question because even in Sweden, I think we discuss sometimes laws to prevent like speculation on housing, and I think this is kind of a law. So if you shortly can tell a bit about that.
Yeah, the rent cap was a very important step for renters in Berlin and tenants, and was something that, or like one of the most important political measures that affected almost everyone. I mean, when we went to people's doors and on the street and talked to people, even though they were not very deeply into politics, everybody knew the rent cap and thought, yeah, I had to pay 100, 200 euros less per month. And that really affected me. So that is something that can change people's lives. And the problem with the rent cap is that it was only not valid in Germany because the Constitutional Court ruled that it is a federal responsibility to regulate the rent and not on the, in Sweden you say, I think on the land level. So they cannot do this locally, but the federal government has to make this law. But apart from that, the law was completely fine, and it was not unconstitutional. It was just they did not have the competence to do that. So that was the problem. But it showed that there are things that you can do that affect many people and improve people's lives. And that's why we, for example, and many others are now fighting for a rent cap on a federal level, not only in Berlin, but in whole of Germany. And that is a policy measure that could, I mean, the next government could do that. They don't want to, but they could. It's not unconstitutional.
Okay, I think we answered, or Jonas answered all questions from the chat, I think. As I said, we can continue a bit more if there is another question. Javier asked about social media, but I think we answered that one.
Yeah, social media
Okay.
really was important. That's a very clear answer. Of course, yeah, it was important, but it's also clear for us that through social media you can only reach some sort of people, and most people we reached probably through social media were people who already had heard from us and were sort of convinced. So social media was very important, yes, but in order to gain a majority in a referendum, we really experienced that the most important part is to talk to people, to go where people are, and don't wait for people to come to you. So that's why we really had to leave our bubble and go. Many people went to areas in Berlin they've never been before, because there's nothing else than suburban housing going on. And if you don't know anyone there, you are never in these areas. And that's where we had to go. That's where we went. And that's where people were convinced. And that's where people really said, yeah, we probably don't have anything else in common, but we have this in common. That is a common goal that we share and that we can fight upon, even though we have totally different realities of our everyday life. But that's not the important part. On a political level, we want to achieve the same thing. And that's really something that, that inspired us as well.
All right. Since we're gone past 45, I think we'll start ending the program now. But I want to say many big thanks to Jonas for coming here. It was incredible to hear your story and some background about the movement and your future now that you actually won, which is amazing. And I want to say thank you from Allt, alla for you to coming here to talk with us on Bostadsrådet, and wishing you great success in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I think thanks also from Rädda Hyresrätterna though. And I think also we of course have to continue like sharing each other's experiences and so on, and sharing of course a common struggle for housing. Okay, so thanks everyone for listening for today. I think we can finish for now. Okay, bye-bye.
Tack så hemskt mycket allihopa. Thank you very much for a very interesting and inspiring discussion. I think everybody here got a lot of ideas, and we are really thankful, and maybe we will continue calling you and ask you some more questions in any other ways that we can. But thank you very much for coming and being our guest today.